We're live.
Great. Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. We'll wait. Hopefully, Michael will join us in progress. Is there a motion to open the meeting?
I make a motion to open the meeting.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please signify by aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
All opposed? Fine, we are in session. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin first by a review and approval of the minutes of November 5th. If you recall from last week, we conditionally approved the minutes for the joint meeting with the Board of Ethics and our own meeting on November the 6th. So is there a motion to approve, to give final approval to the minutes of November 5th as amended?
I make a motion to move.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes as edited for November the 5th? If not, then all in favor of approving the minutes of November 5th signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. There's a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting as edited for the meeting on November the 6th.
Can I make that motion, but can I also interject and let you know that I just got a text from Mike Copey saying that he was running late. So he was apologetic, but I guess with everything going on with the state, he's got his hands full.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes as edited, the minutes of November the 6th? If not, please, all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. Now the minutes as edited of November the 13th last week. Is there a motion to approve those minutes as edited?
Didn't we still have an open question that you had, what you highlighted in green for John to clarify?
Yeah, I didn't understand what was the clarification that you were looking for.
Okay. Let me pull up those minutes and I will tell you what my question is. Bear with me a minute.
Do you want me to resend it to you?
Why don't you read it to me, John, if you can? That way I don't have to disappear.
Sure.
You have it.
Sure. So you had 1, 2, and 3 or minutes or revised version with suggestions, and then the third point that you had was regarding the following entry. I think we agree that the subject of advisory opinions is very important. When would one of you take on consideration of this subject and propose a position / recommendation for the committee? And then it was Mr. Hofstetter said, New York State has a comprehensive whistleblower law and that the village had a full-time attorney when the Code of Ethics was passed into law. He said that the Board of Ethics is being used for de facto free legal advice. Ms. Houtman said a volunteer committee, the Board of Ethics, is doing a great deal of work. Mr. Copey agreed. Ms. Houtman said all of the provisions in the Code of Ethics falls on the Board of Ethics with no enforcement mechanism, and said there was a lack of accountability in the village management. Mr. Copey clarified that he was clarified what he previously agreed to, which was that a volunteer board was doing this high volume of work. Mr. Copey questioned whether the village attorney should be included to help the Board of Ethics. So I wasn't sure.
Did I have question marks bracketed around?
I didn't
Or
see
was
any
it just-
question. I didn't see any question marks.
You responded to my email, Dan, when I said I didn't see anything highlighted in green. You called out the one sentence you were questioning. And I can go away and look at the email if you want.
Okay, you know what? In the interests of time and the amount of work we have, I'm going to table, if without objection, I'd like to table this part of the
Okay.
meeting, and I will come back to you with a clarification, but I'd like to, I know we don't want to take up a lot of time. We've got a lot of work in front of us. So if, without objection,
That's
I'll-
fine.
I'll table that.
Okay.
Okay. Item number 4 on the agenda is the status of mailing and emailing the ad hoc committee's solicitation letter to community organizations and others. So where we are now is, first of all, the letter is, I've posted the letter on Nextdoor Orienta, which is a blog. I also, Trustee Natchez has sent it out to his mailing list. And I have after you saw the exchange of emails between Jerry Barberio and me, and I then, in deference to his request, asked the Board of Trustees for their views on whether we can send the letter. And if I understand, Ellen, the point you made earlier at the last meeting and what the follow-up was, because we are addressing the letter to Mamaroneck residents, by necessity, there will be village employees who are residents of Mamaroneck who will be getting our letter. And I believe your question was, since we have been asked not to communicate directly with Village of Mamaroneck employees, does our letter to residents violate that?
Correct. That was
that-
my question. Yep. However,
Okay.
having said that, I have no idea if anybody who's on Nextdoor Orienta is a village employee, or if anybody on Dan Natchez's mailing list is a village employee. So maybe I'm being too rigorous in that question.
I think having put the notice, I thought about exactly what you said afterwards. And my view now is that we are not communicating with Village of Mamaroneck employees as employees. We're communicating with residents. If they happen to be employees, so be it. So I would like to take the view that we can send this letter out to as many mailing lists as we wish, because we are not directly communicating with them. And I'm happy to inform the board that this is our view, and that what we would like to do is have their permission to use the village mailing list to communicate with residents and with labor unions. But in other respects, we believe that the incidental contact we will make with employees by virtue of our our general mailing list does not violate the spirit of that instruction.
No, I would agree with that. The only concern I have is, following that email chain from earlier in the week, I think it's on the agenda for the next work session. And I know the work sessions have been huge of late. So I hope this doesn't keep getting delayed.
I hear you on that, and I would like to just go ahead and do a general mailing to, again, without violating the spirit of the instruction that we are not to communicate directly with village employees by, say, dropping off letters at the at one of the offices like the police department. I
Right.
think if we just do this mailing, I think we're good. And I think we have the tacit or implied approval of at least one trustee in that trustee Natchez sent our letter out to his mailing list, which I presume to be a fairly large list.
And the other thing also, I mean, Jerry Barbario did approve a week ago, whenever it was, that we include our letter in the Friday email blast.
Exactly. And
So,
so what I would like to do is ask if there is a motion to approve including our letter as written in the Village of Mamaroneck general email that is sent out on a Friday, and also to express the sense of the committee that our mailing our letter to community organizations and groups and the organizations and groups we had intended is compliant with the spirit of the instruction we received from the village manager with respect to our request as to communicating with village employees. That is as inarticulate as I can express myself. But if you understood what I'm saying, then I'll ask for a motion to that effect.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
second,
And on
Charles,
discussion
what
of
was
that, I would add to communicate, I will communicate that to the trustees. So they understand that this is what we're going to be doing. Any further discussion on that?
Sorry, who seconded?
I did.
Is there-
Ellen,
Yes,
Thank you.
Ellen second. All in favor signify by aye or raising hands.
Aye.
aye.
Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you for that. I will proceed accordingly. The next item on the agenda, oh, by the way, do we have any members of the public or anyone else attending the meeting?
No.
I guess Sally would know.
No, there's no one else.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Um,
Brian, excuse me, Brian, can
Yes.
you send me the minutes that were approved so
Yes.
I can present them at the next board meeting? Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, those minutes are going to be put in final form. I mean, there's the minutes that are, you want the minutes that are approved. You'll get, that's November 5th and 6th. You'll get those.
Yeah. Right after this.
And I
meeting.
think what I need to do, Brian, is send you a final.
Oh, I could do that
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for
right
that.
after this meeting.
Yes, essentially accepting all changes. Okay. I think we've actually covered 4 and 5. So we move on to the RACI matrix, and Ellen, you have the floor.
Well, since I sent that out, so Jocelyn started in the beginning of, actually before the meeting kicked off, saying she liked it. Brian responded, you've now responded, and Michael's responded. So John, you're the only,
No, I'm sorry. I read through it and I understand it completely and I think it makes sense. I'm sorry.
don't apologize. So then what I'll do is, and I'll go through your working code, Dan. So I have all your additions in there.
Great.
And wherever there are sections for action items, I'll continue blowing this out. So at some point, we'll need to review, my guess is the who in each of the columns to make sure I've got it right. And then obviously we need to get all stakeholders involved.
So
Okay.
can I ask a clarifying question about that?
Sure.
Is that the kind of thing where you would do a comparison against maybe the model law as well?
Well, in my mind, John, the RACI matrix, starting it at this point, is almost a working document. So it would need to be vetted against our final proposal on the changes to the code, which would include what you sent this morning, our comparisons to the other municipalities, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay,
So
I just wanted
I
to be
would-
clear. Yeah, I mean, I think I think taking the model code and building off the model code may be better, may be helpful for us. That's all.
Yeah, I'll be looking at a variety of things. But again, it needs to sync up with what our final version is from a recommendation perspective. And this becomes a supplemental document.
Okay. Anything more on that, Ellen? Thank you for doing that.
Yep, nope, I'll keep plugging away.
Great. Okay. Let's move on. And I think we can combine items number 7 and items number 8 because item number 7 is by necessity going to become part of 8, given the tasks that we're working on and that we're sharing. So as I mentioned in my email of yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, or maybe the day before, I would like to plunge into actual discussions of sections of the Code of Ethics to start hearing each other's views on what needs to be changed, how the code can be improved. At some point, we'll have hopefully some consensus on this. My starting point was my own reading of the code and what I observed to be inconsistencies or omissions, and couple that with some of the opinions we heard from the members of the Board of Ethics and our discussions to date among ourselves. So I started to work my way through sections. I did not compare my changes to the model code or to other codes. I thought I would rely upon you all who are doing that to point out comparisons and to comment as you see fit. I'm very eager to have an open discussion, and everything from Dan, you're out of your mind, it's impractical, you're crazy, to hey, I think we can do something with that. So with that in mind, I'd like to start discussion of that. We don't have to go in the order of the sections because of the definition section, we don't have to get caught up on too many definitions. But I will tell you the first thing I would like to talk about is whether we're going to call this the Board of Ethics or the Ethics Board. Because if I read the code correctly, the Board of Ethics goes out of business and the new entity is the Ethics Board. And yet it is consistently referred to under the law as the Board of Ethics. So my own view is that I think we commonly know it, and the members commonly refer to it as the Board of Ethics. And I think it's fair to say that I think it ought to remain the Board of Ethics, and it's confusing to a reader, and especially to a lawyer, to see it referred in two different ways.
I agree.
Mhm. Me too.
All right, so I think
I don't think it really matters what it's called as long as it's consistent, and if it's, I agree.
okay. So I'm going to proceed on the basis that as we change this code, it's going to become the Board of Ethics. We will, in the course of our discussions, as we are all taking notes and Ryan is taking minutes, we will come to, we'll vote at the end. We don't have to vote on individual provisions now because as I've been going through it, I've been making changes of my own editing. I even added a section this morning relating to itemize the contents of what the annual report should look like. So why don't we start by, I tried to put some teeth into the sections regarding, well, why don't we try something that perhaps we might be able to get some early agreement on. 2116, which is advisory opinions. Based on our last discussion, I think we were agreed. By the way, hello, Michael. Welcome to the meeting.
Oh. Hi, guys. I did not want to interrupt. I apologize.
Glad to have you. On the subject of advisory opinions, I think we talked last week about the fact that there is a certain peril when someone calls a member of the Board of Ethics and says, I'm thinking of, I need an answer from you on X, Y, or Z. And the member says, you're fine, you can do this or don't do this. And then at a later time, if the behavior is questioned, the inquiring party says, oh, I got an informal opinion for the Board of Ethics. And I think it made a couple of us, maybe all of us, somewhat nervous about that there should be some record. And so what I attempted to do under 2016 was describe what an advisory opinion was and what an informal advisory opinion was, and to make clear that an informal advisory opinion was not binding upon the board, and that if the inquirer wished to have something that he or she would later rely upon, they would have to apply for a formal advisory opinion, which they could hold the village to.
Dan, can I just ask what's an informal advisory opinion, like an example, just because in a perfect world, wouldn't all be formal?
An informal advisory opinion is the owner of a retail store in Mamaroneck who has a very good regular customer who buys items from the store, and then the customer appears before one of the land use or board of trustees for an issue, and the retail store owner view is that this is just somebody who comes into my store and spends a couple $100 a year. I shouldn't have to recuse myself from deliberation on this land use item. And so Board of Ethics, is it okay? Do I need to recuse myself or not? And the Board of Ethics member says, no, if all this person is doing is coming in and spending $300 a year, you can vote on their issue. And then at a later time, somebody says, oh, you should have recused yourself. And he says, oh, I went to the board. They said it was okay.
I would
But
say that's a formal
Yeah,
opinion.
I would say that's a formal opinion. I mean, that's a cut and dried. This is where I think we get into a problem. Is where
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, John.
I personally think the ethics board or the Board of Ethics is supposed to be adhering to the open meetings law. So the fact that they have been issuing informal advisory opinions to people without documenting what opinions they've been giving is a violation of the open meetings law. They're supposed to, as it stands even right now, be logging all of that and keeping track of all of that. And they're not. And I wouldn't say informal. I would call them advisory opinions, because I don't think there is any opinion that the ethics board should be giving that is informal.
You mean singularly, or in other words, are you taking the position, John, that there should be no binding informal opinions? Because I think I heard Mark say, oh, we respond to questions all the time.
But my issue with Mark saying that is they shouldn't be doing that. They should not be doing that. They should be documenting those questions. If somebody is concerned enough that they have brought an issue to them, they should be documenting that issue and documenting the advisory opinion that they give that person.
I agree. I think that the term informal is inappropriate. I think that if an individual goes to the ethics board and seeks advice, not only should it be documented, but it should protect him or her, and it should be there. I can't imagine that somebody would go and then they would get in trouble later for something that they went to the ethics board with.
I agree. They're concerned enough or something in the code triggered the question. And if they're going to get an opinion, I think that needs to be documented.
All right, so if someone calls the chair or a member of the committee and asks the question that I framed, what is the response of the member? Is the response of the member, you must make a formal request to me and we will reply?
I think so. I think there needs to be like a clear process. Like if you call someone the night before an event, I feel like that's kind of on you.
And I think I think what has gotten lost here in this ethics board process or board of ethics process is, hypothetically, you had the scenario that you're talking about, and Bob, who is a customer of your store and spends $500 a year or more in your store, is now going to appear before you because you're on the zoning board. If there was a previous decision, the idea being that these advisory opinions would be indexed and searchable and, would be able to be a resource for people, the ethics board wouldn't even have to meet in order to have, to share information. They could just say, go to this decision or go to this advisory opinion. We've already ruled on that. We've already outlined that. I think a lot of these issues would be, I think the fact that there's no record of any of this stuff is just mind blowing.
And a lot of that, going back to our earlier discussion,
Ellen?
Ellen,
I think Ellen froze.
You're back.
Can I offer one thing? Oh,
I was just going to say, it goes to, we need processes across the board.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there are no informal opinions. There are only formal opinions.
Mhm.
What we have to do is, and thank you for that, what we have to do is arrest the practice, if it exists, of giving informal opinions, and either we enshrine that in law by saying that we can word it in such a way as to say that only formally issued opinions of the Board of Ethics are binding upon the village.
Right, and I think our goal is to avoid some of the misinterpretations or lack of communicated discussions and make sure that they're documented and that they're formally responded to. And that's how we're trying to increase the clarity of what's taking place going forward. And I fully agree with that.
And I think also, John, getting to you saying a way to look up previous decisions, maybe we have a bunch of frequently asked questions as a starting
Absolutely.
point.
Absolutely. And those, I mean, I think the more decisions or the more advisory opinions that the ethics board gives out, the more informed the staff would be about the the ethics law and the ethics board in general. I mean, I just think the idea that they should be indexed, especially in a day and age when we can index anything electronically, it should be something that's easily done.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm going to revise that section accordingly, and we'll put it in a new draft form and circulate that for everyone's
Can I
consideration.
sort of touch on something that sort of ancillary touches on this issue?
Yeah.
Many of the other municipalities require that there be a written request for an opinion. I mean, is that something that we should be asking for?
But I think that goes to, there's absolutely no, that I'm aware of. I shouldn't say it doesn't exist, but there's no process for getting an opinion.
But that's what I'm saying. So
Yep.
my question is, if the only way you can get an opinion is if you have a written request to get an opinion.
I would say
John?
that makes sense. Isn't there a mailbox? Board of Ethics mailbox where you send the request to, and that also is a form of documentation.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, I think it's something for us to explore, because I think every one of the other municipalities that we were comparing the law, our law to, they each required a written request.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think that's more on record. If we can create a process or improve it, I think that should be a requirement. Or
Can I just offer one thing?
create a
I get the written. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're on, Michael.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just the delay. I get the written part. I think it's more important that the result, the decision, is written and indexed and documented, and that I wouldn't want to do anything to, prevent the flow of these requests coming in. So I think that even a conversation seeking that input, I think that should be accepted, so long as the person who received the input properly documented and that the result, the opinion, is documented.
But I think what Mark was getting at was that the ethics board was being used as a tool or a cudgel against some people, and perhaps unfairly, because the ethics board had received a request for information or a request for an opinion about something. And if somebody wants to remain anonymous, it provides a shield for them to to essentially use the ethics board, and not in a good way. And I think if you're willing to put your name on something or ask for an advisory opinion, even if it's just advisory, and you put your name to it, I think, I think that's more. it's a traceable issue as opposed to somebody using the ethics board as a way of getting even.
But I also think, and Michael, I agree with you, what's important is the response. But I think if the person reaching out to the board has a question and is able to do a phone call, that opens the door for a member of the board to just answer. You know, it's not a tight control.
And the decision in my mind is either this is ethical conduct or this is not ethical conduct, which I think is important here. And so somebody's intent here, they may have nefarious intent. I understand that, but if the conduct is bad, I think the goal is to bring that to light. And if it's not, the goal there is to say, here, this is okay. So I hear what we're saying about documentation. I just think that that is accomplished at the end result, right? That everything is documented and indexed.
But I think you run into an issue where the ethics board could essentially, or board of ethics, could essentially basically be the recipient. Hypothetical. I'm just going out on a limb, a far limb. I grant you, but the board of ethics receives 100 requests for them to give opinions on something, on various issues. But they only decide to look at 10. How do you decide which 10? How do they decide which 10? There's no record of any of the other requests that have come in. You know, I mean, it's just the opportunity for something, you know, for somebody to be unfairly, to get incomplete information or to not get enough information is there if you don't have a record of a request for an opinion, a log for that, a log for the decision, and you know, a redacted decision, opinion, showing the facts of whatever the issue was. To me, that's reasonable.
What's reasonable?
I think it's reasonable for us, for the Board of Ethics to receive a written request from somebody. And I don't think there's anything wrong with us requiring a written request, because it provides a log for the whole process. It initiates the process. It starts it allows for the ethics board to create a log for every advisory request they've had. You know, hypothetically, they receive 100, 75 of them are, once they've gotten this process down, 75 of them are decisions that they've made in the past, so they can refer them to previous opinions. And they only have 25 issues that they have to address that are unique in any way, or 10, or whatever the number may be. But at least that way,
John?
somebody doesn't leave the process feeling like they haven't gotten heard.
Would you allow a written response from an anonymous source, or a written referral from an anonymous source?
What do you mean?
Somebody sends a letter in that this behavior is unethical, and we would like somebody to look at it. We have a village employee who is receiving favors, gratuities from a contractor he's doing business with.
Yeah, but Michael, that's a request for an investigation as opposed to a request for an advisory.
Something along that line. If somebody sends it in and says, because John is saying, well, if somebody could use this against their people they don't like, right?
All right,
That's
but wouldn't
the point here is that might be used like that. And what I'm saying is, if somebody does the same thing as send it anonymous in a letter format, the board should look at this and issue an opinion.
Don't the whistleblower laws protect people for that?
I think an anonymous opinion, anonymous complaints are fine. Lots of big investigations are started as a result of an anonymous opinions. I think, or requests. I think what we're focused on now is whether, I think if one writes to the committee, to the board of ethics, and asks for an opinion, I think that the identity of that person has to be disclosed to the board.
I totally
But there
agree.
is a provision that assures confidentiality with respect to if the inquirer wishes it, so that if a retailer who owns a property wants to expand next door, and well, I'm trying to come up with an example, and I think where I'm getting to is I think the code already provides that publicly available copies of opinions shall contain such deletions as may be necessary to prevent the disclosure of the identity of the involved officers, board members, and employees, so to speak.
So in this section that we're talking about, I totally agree. If someone's seeking an opinion, I don't see an anonymous request to seek an opinion if they want something back, right? So how do you give something back to someone you don't know who sent it to you? That's sort of, or it could come in from an email address that's not clear who it's from. That's fine, and then you would respond to that email address that's not signed by an individual's name, but at least it would be documented. Complaints about bad or inappropriate behavior, that's not an advisory opinion. So I think we just need to separate them, as you were saying, Dan.
Yeah,
And that would be a criminal. It would be a criminal issue. It would be
yeah. My concern about an anonymous advisory opinion is,
do people ever seek opinion on somebody else's behavior?
That's my concern, Michael. If someone is doing what the current board complained of, you send in an anonymous letter asking for a hypothetical opinion, putting forward a hypothetical situation, and then you turn around and say, I gotcha. Here's the Board of Ethics at a later time saying you couldn't do what you said you couldn't do what you did. That person, I think the identity of an inquirer on an advisory opinion has to be disclosed.
I am comfortable with that, but I think we were asking for what if it's not, and it's a clear response to that individual. I just can't, maybe I just can't think of the hypothetical where an advisory opinion that's all agreed upon, documented, is going to come back to haunt someone. I would say we want it to say we gave an advisory opinion on this and we're comfortable. It would almost be a good thing to have. I can't think of an alternative, but maybe.
But I mean, I would imagine that if somebody's created an anonymous email address and sent an email to the Board of Ethics regarding a business owner who was on the zoning board, who was doing contracting work for the village, and it included detailed specifics, that should be referred to a criminal investigation. That should not be a Board of Ethics.
And I would say it's not an advisory opinion request then, right? Do we agree on that? Look, I could get comfortable with advisory opinion requests you have to identify. I could go easily with that suggestion. I'm just saying if it's an advisory opinion, which is, can someone vote on my matter if they've shopped in my store? And I would say we need more information to that person. Like, what do you mean shopped in your store? Like, so I can see either way, but I don't know how important it is, but we should just make it clear what's acceptable or not, whether.
But see, that's a village attorney question. That's not a ethics board question. You know, if I'm on the zoning board and this person has come into my store and they spend a good amount of money, you know, they spend $500 a year in my store, and they're coming before me on the zoning board. That's a question that you got to go to the village attorney for and ask the village attorney, you know,
Well,
do you, or the planning board or the zoning board attorney.
That's what should happen. But I think the concern is that members have given answers that are maybe inconsistent with other members, and therefore that to me would be part of the process to respond to the opinion. But I maybe we're just spending too much time on this, but just I like the putting it all in formal writing in some way, shape, or form for tracking. And if it's not appropriate for an advisory opinion, we could just say, this isn't an advisory opinion request. It needs to be handled this way.
The other reason why it makes sense to have it all in writing is if you're making a phone call, you're calling one of 5 board members. If it's all in writing, it's going to the central board mailbox. Everyone sees the request and would see a response from a given member. So if there's any objection, you're able to chime in. A one-on-one phone call, you're not able to do that.
Okay, I think I've got the sense of our view, and I will attempt to embody that. I think we do have to still recognize that there is, and I trust this is the case in other codes, maybe not, that there has to be some protection for the inquirer who discloses his or her identity, but who otherwise wishes to remain anonymous to the public, because there are circumstances where we should be protecting that person who may be disclosing a prospective business transaction. So I'll change that accordingly. Thank you for that.
When you started this whole review discussion, you mentioned that you didn't really want to focus on definitions yet. But one of the things that seemed contradictory to me throughout the whole code was who does this apply to? Some cases it called out volunteer committees, some cases it didn't. The upfront definition was kind of vague around committees and consultants. But later on, a consultant would be mentioned. Like, I'm pretty sure now, and I may be off on this, we're utilizing a consultant for our engineer, since we no longer have an engineer, village engineer. If that's a regular consultant, I think that person should be subject to the code of ethics. But if it's a contract employee who you're bringing in for a week, you know, to help a backlog of something, then maybe not. You know, I just think we need to focus on the who throughout the whole document, or state up front who the who is, and that applies to everything.
Yeah, I did attempt to broaden in some respects the coverage of the code, because there were, in my opinion, inconsistent definitions and applications regarding household members, immediate family. And so I tried to broaden that by putting in specific relative siblings, by putting in specific definitions. And I think it's a very good point. If there is someone who is, by virtue of the amount of time they are spending, for all of the purposes, for all of the definitions, an employee, then that full-time consultant who acts as an engineer has to be drawn in under the code of ethics.
Yeah, we have a lot of land use consultants that this should apply to. And we should specifically spell out, my opinion is we should specifically spell out the positions throughout the village that this applies to. You know, the employees and staff I think is pretty well covered. I mean, more so the committees and boards, because to me, there are certain committees that it just doesn't seem to make as much sense to, not that the level of disclosure should be different for certain people than for certain others. The rec committee doesn't have the same authority as the planning board or the zoning board or the HCZM.
Right, but that's the disclosure part, but I don't
Yeah.
see anything wrong with having all volunteer committees receive a copy of the Code of Ethics every year and acknowledge they've read it.
I agree with you. Yeah.
I'm
I
volunteering
agree
on the
too.
budget committee on behalf of the village.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that's not clear in the who is this for.
Okay. All right. We're approaching the hour mark. I'm not going to hold us too longer than the hour, but I do so only in anticipation that I'm hoping we get lots of replies that we'll have to address and fold those replies into our discussion of various sections. But this is detailed work, so we may have to. We're not meeting next week, but we may have to convene perhaps 2 meetings the following week, or start to meet on a bi-weekly basis in order to get through everything we have, if we're going to stick to a December 31 deadline. And I think a December 31 deadline is, I'm less and less optimistic that that's reasonable to ask us of.
I have a
So-
question though. So of
Yeah.
course I'm on a process question again. I apologize, but so 2 versions or 2 mailing lists have gotten our letter and we're going to be including it today. We have our mailbox in there. How do we receive any emails?
I think, Sally, you send that to us, don't you? You're going to let us know when we get mail?
I'll double check with Cliff, but I believe that any emails that are coming into the Board of Ethics distribution email list are being forwarded.
Okay, so it
your
would happen automatically,
address.
Sally?
I think so, but I'll double check with Cliff. And I need to say 2 other things, please. I need 72 hours notice of any meeting that you're going to have. If you could give that to me, that's under the law. If you have an emergency that you need to meet, that's different, but other than that, 72 hours. And I have another Zoom at 1, so you can keep going, but I'm not going to be listening to you in the next couple of minutes. And then just leave when you're done. If you need anything else from me, if you could just email me, that would be great.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sally.
Thank you, Sally.
Thanks.
Quick question for you though. So I'm clear in my mind, the email box that we now have for our replies, is that something that we can check or you check?
I'll have to check with Cliff. I don't know where they're getting forwarded. I believe they're getting forwarded to the 5 of you. I can ask if they also get forwarded to me, if you would like for me to keep a record of what you're getting.
At the risk of burdening you even further, I'd love to have you get whatever we get. But it would be wonderful if there could be an automatic forwarding to us, so that we don't have to bug you to find out what's in the mailbox.
Absolutely.
Sally, can you ask
John?
Cliff? Can you just ask Cliff when they get forwarded to us? They're not deleted out of that email address, that email box, are they?
Nothing is ever deleted from our email.
Boy, oh.
So really, you don't need. It should. Anything that goes into that email box should stay there in forever. So, we should. Keeping track shouldn't be that hard.
Right, so I don't think there's a benefit, Sally, of you keeping track of our emails if that mailbox is keeping track of the emails.
As long as nobody's deleting them.
Correct.
They can't be deleted. They can't ever be deleted.
Okay, so I'd like to go over to another subject matter, which I think is kind of a black and white issue, or at least you fall on one side of the divide, and we can pick up the other issues at our next meeting, and at some point we'll have to just work our way line by line through the code. It would be great if we could all sit around a table, but that's not going to happen for months. I'd like to go to section 2118, training and education. And what I did there was I simply said training and education now goes to the village manager. It's off the table of the Board of Ethics on the basis that asking a citizen volunteer group of people to organize a ethics training for an entire village is too much responsibility. They just don't have the kind of authority, time, or whatever. And it's more properly in most companies, it's an HR function. It should be an HR function. The Board of Ethics can make contributions. They can recommend training programs. They can recommend content. But if you were giving training to employees, it should be ultimately the chief operating officer.
I agree completely. And the other thing also is the attendance tracking would be up to the village. And so it just makes no sense for it to be with the Ethics Advisory Board or whatever we're calling them, Board of Ethics.
Any other thoughts on that?
Jocelyn is an HR person. Are you in agreement with that?
I am. I gave my thumbs up. I totally agree.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, that should be a no-brainer, especially, I mean, in this day and age, there should be no problem with finding an organization that does municipal ethics training.
I still haven't heard back from the state. I followed up again this week, left another message. But the document they used in the November 5th class is available in PDF format on their website. So there is a starting point for whoever we're going to deliver the training.
I apologize. I also have a Zoom call at 1, so I'm going to drop. Apologies.
Okay.
Have a good Thanksgiving, Jocelyn.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry.
All right. We have hit the hour mark. I would like just a limited discussion, if you will, on your thoughts about what I put into the proposed law on failure to file a disclosure statement, on having heard that there's no penalty, there's no teeth. What I wrote is that if you don't file within 30 days, you get fined $500, and for each month thereafter, you're subject to, you can appeal. If you file an insufficient notice, you can appeal, but you get fined. And if you don't file, at some point, it's a vacator of office, you're out. Without getting into too much in the weeds on that, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree, but I'd like to see up front I don't want to say removal from office, because the goal here is to make sure there is no conflict. And so the money as a penalty is secondary in my mind. I think that the first measure should be you're suspended from that position.
Yep.
Right? And that will gain compliance. I don't care about getting a fine. I mean, I don't want the conflict there.
But,
So let
I
me
mean,
ask you a question on that suspension, Michael. Are you thinking suspended without pay?
whatever it is. I don't want them in a position where they can engage in conduct which would be unethical or inconsistent with what we want. So the fact that we find somebody $500 or whatever the monetary amount is really secondary. We want them to file this, and if they don't, we need to remove them from any role that would put them, in potential conflict.
Okay, I completely agree, but my concern is, and I think this goes back to something we discussed last meeting, and I think that you brought up, Mike, was putting the employees in a position where, this law says one thing and their union rules and regulations say another.
I'm assuming that at some point this gets adopted by the board and that all of that's been hashed out. But at the point where we're looking to gain compliance, it's not going to be gained through a fine. We don't care about the money coming in. If they keep not doing it and the fine keeps accruing, what we want is compliance. And if they don't comply, they have to be removed from the position.
And John, to your concern, I think if we get to that point where the board wants to implement our recommendations, it's up to Jerry and our attorney to work through the unions with this and just explain why. And the union contracts will need to be amended. And I'm sure that's not.
I agree with this. I'm in, very much in support of this. But I think that will be. I think the employee aspect of that is going to be a challenge in the sense of getting, the village passing that part. It's not our problem. And,
right.
I don't think that's made any better by putting a fine on it, right? It's going to be difficult either way. I'm just saying, if they go through the process of this difficult process and get that done, we want something that accomplishes the goal, and that's removing the potential conflict. Right. That's all I'm saying.
Right. And John, you started off by saying you agreed. Our goal here, or our job, is to make the recommendations we think should be made.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And wherever we could document how to implement them, great. But if not, it's up to the village. The same issue we have with the Board of Ethics having all this responsibility. It's not our responsibility. We're here to make recommendations to changes of the code.
Right. I understand and I agree. And I think breaking out the employee aspect of it, having the same issue, like if we propose a code change, proposing the employees under the same situation, but with the understanding that it may be a longer, more difficult fight. So, not giving up on that for the committee members and volunteers and things of that sort. That's all. Because that can be passed tomorrow, theoretically.
That very, very helpful. So I'm going to take some of these comments and see if I can work with the language I chose accordingly. I was really aiming for boards, filers, where there was a real danger, a conflict was being concealed, and I wanted that person off their body that they were sitting on. And
I think Michael's recommendation does that.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't sure that you can suspend an elected official, though, which is why I provided an exception for trustees. That's different. But I'll work with that. Okay, I think we're now at 1:07, and this has been very good. Worked through pretty solid
Dan, I've started making notes on my printouts of looking at the other municipality codes where I think we can incorporate into ours. But I know you're working on the main document daily, so at some point over the next 2 weeks, I will be emailing you, asking you to send me the most final version of your edit, so I could stick my 2 cents in.
Okay. And I'm working on one document that has my initials on it. So I will be updating. I'll send it as I make substantive changes. I'll send that along.
Okay.
Could I just add 2 things before we close the meeting? I don't know
Yes.
if we're going to close. The first thing, I would just offer the rest of the committee, I think we should advise the board today or this week that the December 31st timeline is unreasonable because we got started so late, right? Through no fault of our own. And so we should just put them on notice now that for the best possible product, this would probably be January 31st. I don't know how you guys feel, but I think we give them advance notice.
I think that makes sense.
It's the
I
holidays
think-
coming up.
I think that's fine. I don't think we need to put a close date on it as January 31st. Let's let them put that on there.
Okay, I'm good with that. The more we talk about December 31st, that's not happening. Not with anything that they're going to want.
Right, and
Brian,
to add to
and-
that, Michael, one of the things we discussed before you joined the call was I am going to proceed with the RACI matrix for all other sections. So
that.
adding any sort of process documents to this whole thing is just adding to our timeline. Or it means you guys continue with the code and I'll continue with the process, but it's putting more work on our plate. And even though I'm the one, our first meeting mentioned scope creep, but
Brian, are you okay with asking for an extension?
I wonder if Brian left us.
No, he's still listed as being on the meeting. He
Yeah,
may be-
he went to
All
get a
right.
cup of coffee.
He's also a young lawyer at a new firm, and he's got a little more pressure on him.
Sure.
So I will take that. I will include that in my message regarding the other business I was going to the board on. So that's thank you for that, Michael, and I will do that. Did you have another point to raise, Michael?
I did, guys, and I know it's late. I just want to go back to the topic of, the anonymous, I don't want to say complaint advisory. I may not know enough about the process here, but is there a complaint mechanism that is separate from the request for an advisory opinion?
I think that's the problem. There is no process.
Okay. Well, here's my feeling, and I can close in a nutshell. I did investigations for a long time, and I will tell you that, we had tremendous cases that came from anonymous sources, and sometimes people aren't willing to put their names on paper despite all of the protections that are available. That said, my feeling is the goal is to discover the truth, whether it be bad conduct or good conduct. And so I don't think we want to have anything going forward that didn't have an anonymous complaint mechanism or an anonymous information providing mechanism. And I recognize the extra work that puts on the table, but I think that that's important, and just hopefully we could discuss that in future meetings, and I could be more prepared to discuss my feelings about it.
That's fine. There's a whistleblower provision in the code, I believe, but we can address a mechanism for making a complaint. It might be worth looking at the other codes to see how they address it, but it's a good point, Michael. I think we're agreed on that.
Yep.
Okay. Any other matters that we need to review right now for this meeting? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor indicate aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll be in touch.
You too.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving,
you too, guys.
everybody.
Thank
Stay
you.
healthy, please.
Yes.
Okay, all the best. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.